Everyone, thank you for coming to my webinar on Vue.js, and because it's Vue.js, I have to give it a pun name, so calling this one, check out this awesome Vue. I'm Chris Minnick, I'm a trainer and author, and before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about myself and about Wintellect. So since you're here, I assume you're somewhat familiar with Wintellect, but you may be only familiar with Wintellect is known for consulting and training, and we have instructor-led training as well as on-demand training through Wintellect Now, which is our online subscription-based video service. Wintellect is a Microsoft Gold certified partner and has been Microsoft's #1 training vendor for over 15 years. In addition to our expertise with .NET and Windows, we also have expertise in many other areas like cloud, DevOps, data, artificial intelligence, and web and mobile development as well. Wintellect's founders are industry influencers and have written over 30 books combined. And I'm not going to address this slide right now, except to mention that for those of you in the audience who stay to the end, we'll have some free services and discounts that you can take advantage of if you're interested. And I'll show this slide again at the end of the webinar. I'm Chris Minnick. I'm an author and trainer specializing in web and mobile development. I've written several books, including JavaScript for Dummies, HTML and CSS for Dummies, JavaScript for Kids, and around 10 others. I have 20 years of experience as a full-stack web developer, meaning that I do both server-side as well as client-side web development. And I've been a trainer for over 10 years. I specialize in JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks, general web development, as well as Node and web design and some SEO. Lately, I've been specializing in React and Vue, and I've been doing a lot of writing and working with Vue lately, and so that's why today I'm going to tell you all about what Vue is. I have a 5-day course on Vue that I teach, and this is going to be a 1-hour webinar, so this is going to be a quick overview of what Vue is, and I'm going to show you what the code looks like, tell you about some of the main concepts, and hopefully give you a better idea of whether Vue is something that you might be interested in using or looking into further. Before I get started, I want to get a sense of who we have in the audience here and what your JavaScript experience level is. So I have a quick poll for you. If you could just take a moment and answer the questions in this poll. Okay, great. And so with 83% of the vote in, it looks like over half of you would consider yourselves intermediate with JavaScript. So this is perfect. Let's close this poll. And then I have one more question for you. Okay, great. Of course, everyone's used jQuery, and then we have a lot of experience with Angular, and maybe a quarter of people have worked with Vue and React combined, or third. Perfect. Okay, so this is going to be really useful. It's good information to have. And let me tell you a little bit about Vue, what Vue is, and then I'll get into some code. And then maybe at the end we'll have some time to answer questions as well as if you have any. So close that poll. Vue is a progressive, incrementally adoptable, reactive front-end JavaScript framework. So that's a lot of words and qualifiers, but the main thing that makes Vue different from every other front-end JavaScript framework is its philosophy of allowing this incremental adoption. So you don't need to buy into an entire ecosystem. With Vue, when you first get started, it's really easy to just include the Vue library the way you would do with jQuery, and then just start using it. The progressive here refers to if you have an application that's maybe generated on the server side and you want to start incorporating Vue into this, you can just use Vue for some part of the application. You don't need to convert your entire application to using Vue the way you might have to do with something more heavy like Angular, for example. As you become more skilled with Vue, you'll want to integrate it into a modern front-end web development sort of build, testing, and module structure the way you would with Angular or React. But Vue also makes that process really painless. And so you're going to be seeing an example of that a little bit later on, the tooling that Vue has for helping you to get set up with a modern process and build scripts. Reactivity is this term that's become popular lately in front-end development, which to describe how a web page changes in response to events. And this is basically the whole point of web applications and single-page web apps, but we have this term reactivity and reactive now to kind of describe this. And so when you hear that Vue is reactive, it just means that there's data that when that data changes, it changes the what's showing in the browser window. Vue was created by Evan You. He was working with Angular.js and says that he wanted to create a new framework that just took the good parts that he really liked about Angular and was very lightweight. And so that's essentially the goal of Vue, is to take the good parts of other frameworks and build something really lightweight. And it also has some cool features such as animation that it makes really easy. And Vue was originally released in February 2014. And what makes Vue different, I touched on this a little earlier, but it's incrementally adoptable. You can just use it with a script include the way you would use jQuery, or you can use modern tooling. It combines many of the best features of React and Angular. It has more built-in features than React. So it has built-in and fully supported ways of doing like routing or sort of the flux patterns. So these things that with React, you have separate components that you have to include in order to do things. In Vue, you have more built-in functionality. And you also have this idea of directives like Angular. But Vue is different than Angular, or less complex than Angular, and it's much smaller than Angular or even React. Another big difference between Vue and React or Angular is that Vue isn't supported by a giant corporation. So of course, Angular is Google's project and React is Facebook's. Vue was created by a single person, is supported now by a community of developers, but it's not backed by some giant corporation. And depending on how you feel about giant corporations, this could be either a positive or a negative, but that's the fact. And Vue is developing, moving forward at a very good pace with a lot of contributors, but it doesn't have the backing of some giant internet company. And as a comparison of framework sizes, I thought this was really interesting. You can see Angular there is giant, and React, even the newer versions of React are smaller than Angular still, but still big compared to Vue, which comes in around 58K uncompressed. And then again, here's some functionality-wise, Vue and Angular both have this idea of two-way data binding. So if you input something into a form, then the model detects changes, or Vue detects changes and then updates the view automatically. Or if you change the model, then it updates the form. So that's two-way data binding. But you can also do one-way data binding, and that's recommended in most cases the way it is in React, where it's only by changing the state of the application, the data, that you can change what's showing in the user interface. And then you have to write functions or use something like Redux to update the model when events happen inside of the view. Vue and Angular both have these built-in utility attributes, directives. And so in Vue, we have v-for, v-on, v-bind, v-model, and these are all special attributes that you can use in your HTML to do things. React, on the other hand, just uses pretty much straight JavaScript to do all of its functionality. It doesn't have all of these extra directives and things. So here is a very simple Hello World application. And this uses just a single page. You put this in an HTML page along with the Vue script include, and you can get started with things right here. So I'm going to switch over to my code editor and kind of demonstrate this Hello World and get started with showing you some actual code. So I'm going to make a new file, and I'm just going to, new file, I'm just going to name this hello-world.html. And we'll start this the way you start any HTML file. And then I'm going to go over to my browser and grab the CDN link for Vue. So if you go to vue.js.org, then you can go to Learn and then to Guide. And then right here you can see there's the development version, or there's the compressed production version. And I'm just going to grab the development version. The difference is the development version has some more warnings, more debugging tools, and that kind of stuff. So we're going to take this and paste that into the head. And so now I have Vue included here. And then go into the body, and let's see, I'm going to make a script tag here. And at the heart of any application in Vue is the Vue instance. And so when you're doing just a single page thing here without the build tools or components, then you're just creating one single Vue instance, and it's called the root instance. And then you pass in an object with options. So we have our object being passed into new Vue, and then in the options, the first one we'll do is L, which stands for element, and this tells where you're going to render the Vue instance. And so in order for that to work, we need to have a place for it. So I'm going to have a div with an ID equal to app. And so there's the target where we're going to be rendering things. And then you can optionally have a template, and this will show what to render. And I'm going to start out just by rendering some text. And so there's my template. And well, let's just start with that. And so now if I open this up in a browser, this will just render hello world there in the spot. So not very interesting, but it's a good start. The next thing that you can do with a Vue instance here is have a data object. And the data object is really the heart of everything. This is where you create the properties that are reactive in the application. So these are the properties that when they change, the view is going to update. So I'm going to have one that I'm going to call message, and I'll set that equal to hello view. And then you can use these properties inside of your template by using the double curly braces or mustache, and then inside of there just put the variable name. And now I can go back to the browser, refresh, same thing happens, it displays hello view. So still not super interesting, but we're starting to get into the reactivity part of Vue. This template is actually optional. We could do this without the template by just taking, let's just take this double curly braces here, and we'll put it inside of there, and we'll get rid of the template property altogether. And so now this should do the exact same thing, and it does. And so that is a very super basic Vue application. Templates can use data, can use properties from the Vue instance inside of the render target here. We're going to be looking a little more into the syntax of Vue, what it can do, and then also how to use components. And that's where things start to get really interesting, is with components and the different kinds of data that you can use inside of Vue. So I'm going to go back now to my presentation a little bit and talk about some other core concepts of Vue. One is that Vue has a virtual DOM like React, and the job of a virtual DOM is to manage updates to the browser DOM. So the virtual DOM is in memory, and it renders your views in memory, compares its in-memory rendering to what's currently displaying in the browser to determine how to change what's currently in the browser. And so this speeds up the actual updates of what's showing in the browser, because you're doing it in a more declarative way, where you as the programmer are just saying, here's what I want rendered, and then the program, the library, Vue in this case, will figure out what it is that actually needs to be changed in order to make that happen, and it can do a lot of efficiencies and batch changes and so forth, and find more efficient ways to update the browser DOM. And if you're familiar with React, then you're familiar with the idea of a virtual DOM. But there are some really important differences between the Vue virtual DOM and React's virtual DOM. The React virtual DOM is compiled in advance. So you do a build process to convert all of your JSX code, your template code in React, into JavaScript statements. In Vue, that can be done at runtime or pre-compiled. So if you're using Vue, like we're doing here with the script tag, just including it, then this is going to compile the templates at runtime. If you're doing it in more of the React way, where you have the build process and you use Babel, then that will actually convert your template into JavaScript statements, which is much more efficient, of course. But the runtime compilation can be really handy for doing prototypes or quick demonstrations. The bigger difference is that Vue tracks a component's dependencies. So Vue knows what a component needs in order to render, and so it knows whether something has changed, and it knows whether a component needs to be re-rendered. And so in React, you need to specify whether a component needs to be or doesn't need to be re-rendered. You can use the should component update property, or lifecycle method rather, and to say this component doesn't need to update. In Vue, it automatically avoids re-rendering components that haven't changed. Vue has come a long way in a relatively short time. So since the initial release, there have been a number of big releases. We're up to version 2.0 now, which is where the virtual DOM was introduced and support for JSX templates and server-side rendering. And version 3 is coming up soon. It was announced last year, and we're expecting it to be released some point this year. Version 3 is going to have an improved virtual DOM. It's going to have improved support for TypeScript, and in fact, all of Vue is being rewritten using TypeScript. It's going to have hooks, and so these are a way of avoiding some of the problems of mix-ins, and they're being introduced into React now too. And so there's a lot of talk about excitement around hooks. I'm not going to get into what hooks are exactly, except that they solve some of the problems that come with mix-ins, such as they allow you to pass state from one hook to another, and they make it explicit where logic comes from inside of your components. But there's a really good article on CSS tricks about what hooks mean for Vue. And so if you want to check this out, this is csstricks.com/what hooks mean for Vue. And you can read about what hooks are and what use they're going to be in Vue when Vue 3 comes out. Vue 3 will also have parent and child components re-rendering separately, so you won't need to render child in response to the parent rendering happening. They'll be able to be independent. And then Vue 3, as a result of a lot of this stuff, is going to be much faster than Vue 2 is. A new thing that's just recently come out in Vue is the Vue CLI 3. And this provides standard tooling for Vue.js development. You can use it to very quickly create scaffolding for your applications, to do prototyping, to get started with a project. And it contains all of the testing tools and linting tools and all the build tools that you need for very quickly launching and prototyping, scaffolding an application. And so I want to show you a little bit about how Vue CLI works, because it's really an excellent tool. And one of the things that I love most about it is that it has a GUI, which is something that I think is lacking in far too many web tools. So I already have the Vue CLI installed, and I'm going to create a new project using it. And the way you do that is you say Vue create, and then the name of your project. And I'll just call this my first project. And so you do that, and it's going to create a new directory with the name of that project. And then it's going to go through after you select your defaults here. So you can select the defaults, Babel and ESLint, or other configurations if you prefer. And it's going to go through and just build everything, download all of these dependencies, create a new project for you that you can use to get started with Vue. And so this takes a little bit of time. I'm going to mute for a second here. Okay, so now while it's finishing this, I'm going to show you just some of the commands that you can use with Vue CLI. To install Vue CLI, you can use npm or yarn, and you can do npm install global vue/CLI. Create a new application using Vue create. You can serve your application using Vue serve or by using npm run serve. And then you can start the Vue user interface, the GUI, by typing in Vue UI. So now back in VS Code, We are almost done here with installing all the dependencies and finishing our scaffold application. I can show you, I'll take you for a tour of that and point out some of the important things about Vue components. Okay, great. So now I'm going to change into my first project and then serve this application. So once this finishes building, then the application will be at localhost 8080, and I'll go into my browser and go to localhost 8080 here. And so there's your project, and this just has a little demonstration app there with some links to important information, but we can go back into VS Code and explore the project. You'll see we have the public directory where the index.html is. And so this index.html contains just your div with an ID of app. And then inside of the source, we have components and we have app.vue. And here's the main file that gets included into the index.html, main.js. And main.js is where you import the actual Vue library and you import the root component, and then you create your new Vue instance using new Vue. Here in components, you typically use a render function, and when you use a render function, it takes the place of the EL, which we saw inside of the single page one, and it says we're going to render app, so this is the root component, inside of the mount point here, which is the element with the ID of app. And so this is the render function, very basic, but then this loads in the root component, which is app. And this is a single page component where it contains the template and a script and even the CSS. The important thing here that we'll look at first is that we're exporting this as a component named app, and then it contains subcomponents. It contains a subcomponent called hello world, which we've imported here from component/hello world.vue. And then once we've imported that and we've specified that this is a component we're going to be using inside of this one, then we can use that as an element inside of the template. And like React, if you're familiar with React, you can pass data into that component using attributes. And also, like React, inside of the hello world component, this message becomes what's called a prop. So now if we open up hello world, its structure is very similar to app in that it has template, file, and I'm going to just run this stuff. And I'll save that, and then I'll go back to the browser, and you'll see that it does hot reloading, and we can see the actual what's happening with the project as we're developing and working on components. So here we have the message prop. In order to use a prop passed down from the parent component, we have to specify that it is a prop. So there's an option here called props, which takes an object, which specifies the prop, a list of the props that are going to be used in this component, followed by their type. So now we can use this like any local data, but it is just prop immutable data passed in from the parent. Another really interesting thing to notice here is that we have scoped style. So this is new in version 2, of Vue, we have this idea of this is style that's only used in this component. And so that's just a fantastic thing. If you're familiar, if you've worked with CSS much, you know that it's famously and sometimes catastrophically global. But this makes it possible to apply the style just to this component. So now we're going to look at some other features and just show how things can change inside of Vue, what the different options you can pass into a component are, and then how to handle events, how to call methods, and so forth inside of Vue. We've got, let's see where we're at with time. Okay, still got about half an hour. So inside of, I can close this one. Inside of app view, if I change this message, of course, and save, you'll see that it changes automatically as you would expect. I think I'm getting way ahead of my slides, but let me quickly catch up here. Oh, the Vue dev tools. This is something you can install these from the Chrome Web Store, and this provides some tooling, some debugging things that you'll need for working with Vue. And so I can show you what that looks like. Oops.
Okay, here's what I found.
Sorry about that. Okay. So here I have the dev tool installed, and it will show me a view of my application with the root and then an app and then the props that are contained in it. This is a very simple application, so it doesn't show very much. We can also inspect the DOM here and see some of the CSS things. We can see what it actually looks like, the HTML and everything. And then you can see events that are happening. We don't have any events, of course, so there's nothing happening. And back to the tree view here of the components. So this is really handy when you get into larger applications. In an application this size, it's not of much use. Next, the Vue instance, as I showed, this is a basic summary of the main things, the main options you pass into a new view. So EL indicates the element, where to render. Template indicates what to render. Data is the object containing the model, so this contains the reactive properties. Computed, which I'll show you in a minute, contains methods that return data. And then methods contains the methods that are used for changing data inside of the model. The data object, as I said, is the state of the application. When the values there change, the view updates. Important point about the data properties is that they are only reactive if they existed when the instance was created. So if your application adds properties to data during the life cycle of the application, those new properties won't be reactive. They won't cause re-rendering of the view. All Vue instances have a set of properties, such as we saw the one with the mount point in there, or you have what the value of EL is, or the value of data. And these are prefaced with $. If you want to access things like what is the mount point, what is the data, directly you can access them using $. Vue templates are compiled at runtime or during pre-compiling to virtual DOM render functions. So Vue templates are most often written using HTML, but you also have the option of writing them using JSX now. Or if you really want to, you can write the JavaScript render functions directly, but I'm not sure why you would do that. You can use mustache syntax for text interpolation, as I showed. If you need to output HTML rather than plain text, you can use the vHTML directive to output something as HTML. You can also use JavaScript in templates. So you can say, in this example, we are incrementing counter, or you can do operations like this. It's best to really keep the amount of JavaScript that you use inside of a template to a bare minimum, but it is possible. It's preferable to just call functions that are inside of your script tag rather than doing a lot of logic inside your template, of course. And that last line there shows an example of using JavaScript inside of a directive. So we're concatenating list with the value of ID, and then putting that into the ID element of this div. So vbind allows you to insert data to do one-way data binding between some variables and your elements. Directives are attributes that take JavaScript expressions as their value. They're built with a prefix followed by a directive ID. So in this case, the v is the prefix, and then if is the directive ID, and this will conditionally render this text based on whether test is true or false. Directives may also take an argument, and we use the colon to between the directive ID and the argument. So in this case, von takes an argument called click, and on click it's going to run the function do something. And then some directives have modifiers which use the dot notation after the argument. So in the case of von submit, you can use the dot prevent modifier to add event.prevent default to this submit event, to the submit event handler, rather. And that prevents the default form action from occurring when the submit event happens. So here are some of the Vue.js default directives. These are built into Vue. We have vbind, which does it binds attributes to data using one-way data binding. vif does conditional rendering, and there's also velse and velsif, which I'll show you in a moment too. We have v4 for doing loops, von for event handling, vmodel will do two-way data binding between inputs and the application state. During the lifecycle of a Vue instance, there are some events that happen, and then you can hook into these events to do things at different times. And so this is a little tree showing what the lifecycle of the Vue component looks like. You might not be able to read all of this on your screen, but this is all available on the vue.js.org website. The main lifecycle methods are created, mounted, updated, and destroyed. And you can hook into these at any point just by creating an object or a function inside of your Vue instance. In this case, we're logging something when the Vue instance is created. Vue on creates an event listener. So here we have a Vue on click. We are incrementing counter, and then that's just incrementing the counter property there inside of the data object. You can use small bits of JavaScript directly in the value of the von directive, or you can actually write a method inside of your Vue instance and then call that from Vue on. And that's the preferable way to do it. Event modifiers for von, it has a bunch of them. You probably only ever use a couple. There's .stop, which stops propagation, so stops the click event from going to the parent or children of the element that was clicked. Prevent, which prevents the default action. Capture for using capture mode, so it has inner element events handled first. And a couple others that are much less often used. Here's an example of using v-for for rendering a list from an array. And if you're doing this, it's recommended that you use what's called a key. So this is also a concept in React, which gives the rendering function in React or in Vue hints about how best to render things, and it helps Vue to track each node's identity better. So I'm going to go back to the code. We've been looking at slides too long. And we'll look at our component here and add in some of these things, and I'll show you some of the uses and how to do stuff like these computed methods. So I'm going to, I'll go into the hello world, and I'm going to create a data object here. In a component, you need to actually provide the data property as a function. And the reason there is that you don't want all of your components to have the same, or all of your instances of this component to have the same actual properties. You want them to be instances of properties. So instead of creating an object the way we did in the single page application, we're creating a constructor function here. And I'm going to have like a status there too. So there's some data, and we can use this now in our application. So up here, I'm going to, we'll leave the message there as the h1, and then I'll create a paragraph, and I'll say name, city, and then we'll do another paragraph with status. And that should be pretty good for now. Oh, we have an error. Oh, I'm missing a comma. Let's see if that's good now. No. Love when that happens. Okay. Well, I've got a backup plan. I'm just going to paste all this in. I'm pretty sure this code all works. Okay, great. So I have code that works here, and I'm just going to show it to you as I go along and demonstrate some stuff. So here I have my data. We have some properties, and these are displaying up here inside of the template. So I've also created a computed object here with a function inside of it I called reverse. And so the point of this is just to take the name, so Chris M, and then do some stuff to reverse it. And then you can see I've used that up here where I said, I didn't. Okay, so we can use that just by saying reverse. And so that's going to put in the computed property. One reason you would use computed rather than method, and this is a really important point that I wanted to make, is that computed can be cached. If the things that make up computed, the data that goes into it, hasn't changed, then when you call reverse here, or when you use reverse inside your template, it's not going to rerun this function. And so this can be a really great way to optimize, because you don't have to rerun this, and it can be really good for bigger operations. Methods are always going to run. So this is an example of a function called reverse name, which you can call that inside the template, like I've done right here. And you actually call that using the function syntax with parentheses, and that's going to actually run this method every single time that you call that. You can also do watches. So in this case, I've created a watch using the property name. So whenever a name changes, then it's going to update the value of status. And I can show you that, let's see right here. What I did here is I used a model, the vModel directive, on an input. And so if I go in here and I change the value of this input, you can see that I have two-way data binding. It's changing what's showing in the input, and it's also changing what's happening on the page as the value of name changes. And my watcher, you'll see, also changed the value of status from not watched now to watched. And so that is how you use watchers. And then created here is an example of using a lifecycle hook. And so in this case, I'm running this function to log I've been created when this component's created. So if I refresh here and then go into the console, as you can see, I say I've been created right there. So that is kind of a very quick overview of how components work. Let me see how much time I've got and if there are any questions. Does Vue have built-in support for web content accessibility guidelines? That's not something that I've really dug into in depth just yet. And so I don't know. I know there are definitely ways to support WCAG, and it's not that difficult. But things as for built-in support, I can't answer that offhand. Is there a standard way to connect a Vue app to a backend API? No, not really. Like React, you can use whatever tool you happen to like. JavaScript has the fetch method now, and so you can use fetch. You could use Axios to access backend API. A lot of people seem to be using Axios. It's very popular and also very simple. And I think that's kind of the way things are going. jQuery had the Ajax method, which made it possible to access APIs or to access server-side data using Ajax in a cross-browser kind of a way. But that's not really necessary anymore because browsers all support the same methods. And so actually having a built-in way to do Ajax isn't really that important anymore. Oh, somebody points out that my error was that I was missing a closing P. Thank you very much. But it's really hard to notice those things when you're actually doing it live. Is using all TypeScript for a Vue app a good option today? I think it's possible, but it's not necessarily easy. In Vue 3, using TypeScript will become easy, and it may even become the preferred way to do it because it'll be native and Vue is going to be built in TypeScript. So I would say that's in the future the way to do it. Coming from the Angular world, can Vue separate CSS, JavaScript, and HTML into different files? Yes, absolutely. You can, and it's very common to take your style and put it into a separate style module, take your templates and put them into template files, and then just have your JavaScript in one file as a component. So essentially just your script part here with your properties as a component that just includes your CSS and your template. And then you can organize things separately that way as well. Let's see. We're getting towards the end here. Let's see if there's anything else. Have you tried Vuetify? I have not tried Vuetify. There it is. So it's a material design component framework. Now that I know about it, I certainly will. Thanks for that. Okay, and so the question here, code for the Vue instance at the beginning was different than the code you showed in the Vue CLI, such as you had import statement, whereas in the beginning it was just pure script. Yes, this is an example of the two different ways, and so what they're calling incremental adoption. You can, and this can be confusing if you come in from the component part and then kind of try to backtrack and figure out how the easier method works. And that's kind of what happened to me when I was first getting started with Vue. But you can see in this first example that I had, this hello world HTML. This is the way, if you're familiar with using jQuery, this might be how you want to get started with Vue. This is not the way I would recommend for enterprise development, but this is, certainly a good way to get started with just very simple, include the script, tell it where to render, and then do some things that will render in the spot. The component way of using a root component that's built up using subcomponents is a much more robust way to do things, and that'll allow you to do routing and to do the Redux kind of state management later on. Great. There are some weird things with how JavaScript and Vue interact, such that reactive values won't automatically be detected for certain kinds of changes. So in the case of arrays, when arrays are changed, Vue actually needs to wrap array mutation methods so that it's aware of changes that happen to arrays as a result of these functions. You don't need to think about this, but you should be aware that there are changes to arrays and objects that Vue can't detect, and so this could be a common problem that happens. Most of the time, though, if you just are doing standard kind of mutations to properties in the data object, they'll be picked up, your Vue will update. So that's about all we have time for today. Let me look a little more here. Any more questions? Testing frameworks, Jest is the one that's becoming most popular, so this is the one that's also used with React. And do you have any Vue-specific extensions installed for VS Code? Yes, great question. There is vtour is the one. So this is vtour Vue tooling for VS Code. So that allows you to do the syntax highlighting and whatnot. Let's see. So remember there's the special offer for attendees of this webinar. You can get a 10% discount on any public virtual Microsoft online courses. And you can see the catalog at wintellect.com/MOC. And we're also offering a discount on training related to the new Microsoft role-based certification. And we have an app dev briefing or Q&A that you can schedule with us. You can get a $99 certification exam voucher and a 10% discount for private on-site training. And if you're interested in any of these, please reach out to Martha and she will follow up with you, and her email address is right there. You can also get in touch through the website. And once again, I'm Chris Minnick, and I hope to see you at a future webinar. If you have any topic recommendations, you can let me know. You can contact me in any number of ways or by emailing Wintellect. And it's been fun, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks.